Well, it's that time again, time for us to get together for some inspiration and some motivation. Hope you're well wherever you are today. May God richly bless you. I want to tell you a story. It's a true story. I first caught a glimpse of this woman in my peripheral vision. She was just another face in the crowd, so I thought, till she walked right up to me and she abruptly asserted, "I don't believe in God." Can you say awkward? It was lunchtime, and I was in Tarpon Springs, Florida, at one of my favorite waterfront grills, which I often lovingly refer to as my branch office. The outdoor tiki was filled with the usual eclectic mix of local residents and our seasonal guests, including this rather candid woman. So what did I do? I looked right at her, and without thinking, I said, "Well, God believes in you." She rolled her eyes and she walked away. Now, was I bothered by her brazenness? Well, not at all. It goes with the territory for me. When you're not ashamed to openly admit and talk about your belief in God, as I often do, word gets around, and occasionally some people react. But this was not over yet. A few seconds later, she returned and she said, "Wouldn't y'all like to know why I don't believe in God?" Well, in my mind, please forgive me, I thought, no, not really. Don't judge me. But realizing that she was going to enlighten me anyway, I smiled and I said, "Sure, tell me why you don't believe in God." Well, she said, "Look, all of the pain and suffering and injustice that's in this world, especially among the innocent, if there really was a loving and caring God, why would he or she permit all this tragedy?" And with that, she walked away, didn't wait for my response. And truthfully, I was somewhat relieved, as I had no simple comeback to address such weighty questions. But it did get me to thinking that day. Possibly one of the greatest challenges faced by God-fearing men and women is reconciling our belief in the existence of a divine being whom we profess to be perfect love, perfect justice, reconciling that with the cold, harsh reality of a world that is full of evil and full of suffering. In the midst of so much human misery, hatred, and tragedy, what justification do we have for telling people that God really cares? If he is indeed so compassionate, then why does he seem to do nothing to stop all of this madness? Let's talk. C.S. Lewis was a professor of medieval literature at both Oxford and Cambridge universities before he died in 1963. His well-known works of fiction include classics like the Chronicles of Narnia and the Screwtape Letters. Lewis was an atheist in his early years. He didn't come to have faith in Jesus until he was 32 years old. But boy, he became a devout Christian, and he wrote extensively on the subject of Christianity. His philosophical writings are widely cited by Christian apologists to this day. In 1956, Lewis married Joy Davidman. She was an American writer. Tragically, she died of cancer 4 years later at at the age of 45. In his book, A Grief Observed, C.S. Lewis relates his own experience while he was in the depths of profound grief after the death of his beloved wife. Quoting from the book, he wrote, "Meanwhile, where is God? This is one of the most disquieting symptoms. When you are happy, so happy that you have no sense of needing God, so happy that you are tempted to feel that his claims upon you are an interruption. If you remember yourself and turn to him with gratitude and praise in those happy times, you will be, or so it feels, welcomed by him with open arms. But go to him when your need is desperate, when all other help is vain. And what do you find? A door slammed in your face, and a sound of bolting and double bolting on the inside. And after that, silence. You may as well turn away. The longer you wait, the more emphatic the silence will become. There are no lights in the window. It might be an empty house. Was it ever inhabited? It seemed so once. And that seeming was as strong as this. What can this mean? Why is God so present a commander in our times of prosperity and so very absent a help in times of trouble?" End quote. C.S. Lewis was well grounded and strongly committed to his faith in God. But he lived through a very dark night of the soul, a time when the Almighty seemed almost indifferent to his need. We've all been there a time or two, I suppose, feeling forsaken, filled with erroneous thoughts and a bad attitude toward our Creator, even tempted to give up on the Almighty. C.S. Lewis struggled with an inner cyclone of emotions, but in the end, he did not give up on God. And in time, he came to grips with his grief, and he moved toward a deeper understanding that God's silence is not indifference, nor is it abandonment. As difficult as this may be to grasp, God is always at work in our lives, regardless of the sufferings that we often endure. He cares deeply about us, even when he does not do whatever we desire whenever we want him to. You know, while on planet Earth, Jesus once told his closest friends and followers, quote, "While you are in the world, you will have to suffer. But be of good cheer. Be courageous, for I have defeated the world." That comes from John chapter 16, verse 33. Let me ask you, how does the thought of being told to cheer up and be courageous sound when it is applied to you and me in our world today? With pandemics, economic uncertainties, rampant government corruption, lawlessness, legalized baby murder, sexual perversions, terrorist threats, social unrest, and intensifying natural disasters, all dominating the headlines, where does cheer up, be courageous fit into that narrative? I will tell you. In the face of countless and diverse adversities, cheerfulness and courage are exactly what we need to survive. Cheerfulness and the courage it stimulates in a spiritual context means three things. One, a divinely inspired confidence. Two, a deep trust in God's unfolding purpose for our lives. And three, a conviction that in the end, God will always keep his promises. When Jesus said, "Be of good cheer," or "take courage," he was not suggesting that we should have a naive, Pollyanna view of life's cruel twists and turns. He did promise to be with us always. His Spirit acts as our guide and our comforter, our counselor, our protector, and our healer. However, this truth does not guarantee a pain-free earthly life of uninterrupted bliss to all who decide, "I'm going to follow Jesus." In today's postmodern world, we often hear promises made of how together we can one day achieve a utopian world order here on earth, where we're all going to share equally in prosperity and happiness and well-being. And some who herald this message even proclaim that this is a basic human right, or at least something we all deserve. With a veritable tsunami of heartache and discouragement hammering away at our collective well-being, is it any wonder so many people buy into the false hope of this entitlement ideology? Mother Angelica once said this, quote, "The Christian experience is often a paradox. We possess joy in our sorrow, fulfillment in our exile, light in the darkness, peace while in turmoil, consolation while in dryness, contentment while in pain, and hope while in desolation." End quote. Paradox? Yes. Truth? Yes. After suffering physical and emotional persecution for years as a missionary, one of the early pioneers of Christianity landed in a Roman prison. His name was Paul, and you find his story in the pages of the Newer Testament. While moldering in a jail cell, Paul wrote these words, quote, "I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances of my life may be. I know how to live when things are difficult, and I know how to live when things are prosperous. In general, I have learned the secret of facing either poverty or plenty. I am ready for anything through the strength of the one who lives within me." Now that comes from the book of Philippians chapter 4, verses 12 and 13. The strength of the one, who lives within me. Paul committed these words to paper while facing some of the worst trials of his life. Despite a continual threat of pain and death, he realized that God gives us inner strength to endure all things. So learning to be content in the moment and to persevere in the midst of our most difficult trials, this is essential to finding the genuine pathway to contentment and to a winning life. Another of the biblical writers, James, also understood the reality of human suffering very well. This was his advice. Quote, "Is your life full of difficulties, full of temptations? Then be happy. For when the way is rough, your patience has a chance to grow. So let it grow. And don't try to squirm out of your problems. For when your patience is finally in bloom, then you will be ready for anything, strong in character, full and complete." If you want to know what God wants you to do, just ask Him, and He will gladly tell you. For He is always ready to give a bountiful supply of wisdom to all who ask Him. He will not resent it. But when you ask Him, be sure that you really expect Him to tell you, because a double-minded person is unsettled like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. End of quote. That's James chapter 1, verses 2 through 6. Be sure you go and read that over and over and over again. Double-mindedness means you are as unstable as the waves of the sea tossed by the wind. Now, you may be wondering, what does all this have to do with me and my personal misery? Well, that's a good question. Let's assume that you work hard, you do your best. Maybe you pray. And what happens? Well, you end up getting laid off or fired. You find out you're going to be battling a disease, or someone you love is sick or dying. You've done your very best to be faithful at home, and the next thing you know, there's nothing but chaos as you're dealing with an unreasonable spouse or an overbearing parent or a rebellious child. And perhaps you're thinking, gee, if I'm trying my best to do what is right, shouldn't things turn out okay? Humanly speaking, that would be nice. But it doesn't always work out that way in the actual world in which we all live. And that's what really hurts. If you feel as if all hell is broken loose and you're wondering what in the world is happening, here's an ancient proverb that really helps me when I find myself in those painful moments. Quote, "Trust God from the bottom of your heart, and don't try to figure everything out on your own. Listen for God's voice in everything you do and everywhere you go. He's the one who will keep you on track. Don't assume that you know it all. Instead, run to God while you run from what is evil." That comes from Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6 from the Message. Listen, rough times stink. We all hate the process. And we all think it's unfair. I get that. But you have to move beyond how you feel. None of this is God's fault. And for the record, I've been there too. In both the good times and the not so good times, I have learned that I must place my absolute trust in my Creator. I trust Him because I know that He knows things that I don't know. When the whole world seems to be crumbling around us, what are the alternatives? Are we to trust in various government promises? Are we to trust the news media? Are we to trust in the latest self-help gurus? Or should we dull the pain with drugs and alcohol? Yeah, right. How's that been working for you? What about trusting in God? Now, will that make the cancer instantly go away? Not necessarily. Does it mean that your spouse and your children are going to change immediately? Most likely not. We have no control over what people do, nor any control over the unseen and unforeseen circumstances that happen in this life. Neither do we know what the future holds. But God does. And when you get to know God, you are in touch with the one who holds your future. Has life been a bit difficult? Do you need a fresh start? Change begins when you put your trust in God. But don't expect all of your challenges to just disappear overnight. It's going to take patience. It's going to involve endurance and persistence. In time, you will learn to commit everything you do to the Almighty. You will learn to trust Him to help you do it, and He will. That's what it says in Psalm 37:5. My friends, it's up to you. Get to know your Creator and trust Him with your life. Or just walk away because you think that none of what I've said makes any sense at all, so it just must all be rubbish, right? Honestly, living by faith doesn't always seem rational to me either. But it doesn't have to. That's why it's called faith. I know in whom I have placed my trust. When things don't make sense, my response is, God, I trust you with my life. And you know what? That's making me cheerful. I pray today that God will bless you and help you navigate the treacherous waters of life. I pray today that you will cheer up, that you will take courage. It's time to cheer up. Thanks for being with me here today. Please like and subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube, Facebook. How about hitting the like, share for sure with someone that you believe might get some help from these words today. And until the next time we're together, may the Lord richly bless you, my friends.